Well, welcome back to another episode of the Threshold Lab. And today I'm really excited about the conversation that we're going to have. And this is particularly around this season one topic of the inner game of coaching and leadership. I quickly discovered that there's a list of people out there that have gone through their own experiences who would be really valuable to shed some insight and perspective on this topic. And Coach Joanne McCallie. I come to learn that you go by Coach P as well. I'm so excited to have you because I think you're certainly on that list, and so I'm very grateful you taking some time to join me today.
Oh, I'm excited too, Zach. It's great to meet you, and you do amazing things. So I'm glad to be a small part.
Awesome. Well, for those that have listened thus far, we kind of like to jump into this conversation, and I kind of want to start around that super broad topic, inner game of coaching and leadership. And when I think about it, it seems like the deeper you go into leadership, you start to discover that it's not just about tactics, it's not just about systems, it's also about as a coach or as a leader how you manage your own energy, your own emotions, your own presence. And so, kind of using that as a starting point, I'm curious, like when you think about leading yourself before leading others, what comes to mind for you?
Well, I think that often actions speak louder than words. So how, as a head coach, you carry yourself. For example, for me, it was very important to be in shape, lifting weights, swimming, playing tennis, being an active person, showing the value of what it's like to take care of your mind and body through exercise, because so many women won't go on to play in the pros and their careers would end after college. And just embracing that whole concept, because when you're a player and the coach is demanding of you to do things, you kind of think you're doing it for the coach when in essence you're not, but it feels that way because coaches drive and demand and really try to get to the future image of somebody. And oftentimes an undergraduate doesn't see that future image maybe as well, or has a lower viewer image, or they could be an all-American type that is very good with their future image. But the bottom line is, what kind of example do you set? And the flip side of that too is life is not about perfection. I mean, can you admit mistakes? Can you say you're sorry? Can you forgive? Can players forgive? There's a lot that goes on the court between players. I've seen the fights on the court. I've seen, demanding by me as a head coach. I've seen players love that. I've seen players not want that demand. And at the same time, as a motivator, you are you can't be perfect. You have got, you've got things to work on too. And so I was always pretty clear with my teams that I was working on me as I was asking them to work on them. And I was a big component of sharing therapy. That my teams knew that I was in therapy for pretty much all my coaching time at Duke. And the reason why I did that was I knew the pressures of coaching at Duke, especially following a great coach like I did in Gale. And so I knew I wouldn't be accepted. I knew that people would come behind you and, try to upset the apple cart, so to speak. And some did. And so trying to balance life and having a neutral person to talk with is valuable for anybody. And so I would share, not in that great detail, but I would just let them know that the mind body piece was really, really important to achieving their maximum ability.
I love multiple sentiments in that. One is the notion of the importance of you as the leader modeling what you also expect from a standards standpoint with your players, as well as also managing your own kind of health and well-being. The other side of it too is you talked a little bit about the physical piece of it, like making sure that you're active and taking care of yourself. And then what you also did to kind of nourish your mental and emotional help and getting some help around that. We're part of me is like we should probably dive into this later, but I actually kind of want to, since you just shared it, I'm curious, what do you feel like makes normalizing those conversations or difficult for other coaches to be sometimes vulnerable about seeking that help?
I think we've had so much growth in awareness and education, but there are some really key pieces missing. And, until we can get kids to understand that the brain, the mind, the mind within the brain, heart, lungs, all of that is health. And it's all the same thing. Just like somebody has high blood pressure, they take blood pressure medicine. If somebody is prone to perhaps depression, they take medicine to balance the brain chemistry of their brain. When I stopped coaching in 2020, I, published a book. I went on tour. I spoke about the book, and I did a little test of these student athletes because I spoke at mostly universities. And when I used words like mental health impairment, I mean, they repelled. They absolutely want nothing to do with that. Even when I said mental health, they viewed that negatively. Like mental health is to be celebrated. It's a glorious thing, but that's not what the view was. And so then I started throwing words that I teach, like brain capital, which they love that idea, investing in your brain. How can you make your brain better? They love brain chemistry. They were cool with brain education. And so I just started to try to throw words and have discussions. And I think that's the problem, is that I don't think enough coaches are educated in this area because perhaps they haven't had a brain health issue. So it's perfectly understandable that they would not be comfortable. And also, too, that's probably not their role totally. They've got a lot of work to do. NIL, everything else that's going on. But what's interesting is the brain health piece is more important now than it's ever been because of all the money being thrown around and all the deals and that kind of thing, teaching kids about philanthropy, etc. So it's a time now to really, really kind of grow things and use better words and better education and understanding. And the other piece that's never understood is that somebody who, let's say, has depression and they take their meds religiously and they do a good job with their docs and all that, they are more balanced than the average human. I mean, there are lots of undiagnosed people out there. There are lots of people that aren't undiagnosed and maybe don't have a diagnosis, but got problems from, from where they grew up, what their background was, violence they saw in the home, abuse, you name it, scarred for life and childhood trauma. I could go on and on and on. And so I think people that do get the balance, listen to their doctors, take their meds, do what they're supposed to do, those people are the most balanced. And when people understand that, they say, well, okay, maybe I should, do that. But the other caveat is you can't self-diagnose. Okay, coaches play. I mean, you can't say, oh, I read about this and I think I have anxiety. Okay, well, maybe you do, but it has to go with doctors. Psychiatrists are very, very important. So are psychologists. And so getting the whole thing put together better, I think, is the next step for so that everyone can kind of relax about it and feel like, okay, brain health. We need to take care of that just like we need to have you lift weights and get your muscles strong to play.
One of the things you raise is the importance with intentionality in language and helping kind of normalize that and make it relatable too. So I think even just you flipping it over and talking more about the brain, using things like brain capital, brain chemistry, brain health, all those things, but also too, like you mentioned earlier, the physical piece of what goes into mental health. And I know sometimes now people the adage gets used of like mental fitness or things like that around just like, hey, treating it just like how you would hone your body and improve your physical abilities. Like the same kind of process in a way can apply to how we invest in our mental and emotional and brain health. So I'm curious, you mentioned in your coaching career, especially when you were there at Duke, that you were pretty outspoken with your players around the support that you were having through therapy and everything you were going through. I'm curious, what was maybe the tipping point for you that shifted you from maybe not if at some point managing it privately to becoming such a public kind of advocate for it?
Well, I think let's see here, when I got to Duke and I recognized the triangle, the competition, the pressures, following, a great coach, all those things led me to get support. Now, at that time, I could never talk about my own brain health issue. Um, People can't take that right now. That would have been negatively recruited. Um, Although I've been in such great health for 30 years after my diagnosis, um, it's pretty remarkable what the stigma is still in being a coach. So I couldn't share that, and actually that coming out got me, I think, in trouble a little bit with Duke in terms of me leaving. Okay, so what I'm trying to say is there's a point that you have to keep it very private. I did. But what I tried to do is show the support that I could. For example, we had a mental health day for a game. There's a K-Yow game, as you know, which is a beautiful thing. And that was interesting. There was discrimination there. Some people didn't want to be affiliated with it at all. It was fascinating to see. I got pushback from administration that didn't love the idea of a mental health game. Interesting. But then Kyrie Irving gave us shoes for it. So that no longer exists at Duke. But the point I'm trying to make is I had players with brain health issues. And I think we all do. I don't know if there's a team that somebody does isn't struggling in some way. And so I tried to do the things that made sense you know, um, that I could do the mental health day. And it was hilarious. We had up on the upper deck, massages and dog therapy. And, it was sort of it's just looking at all the avenues, exercise, bikes, whatever you want to say. I really was proud of that at Duke. Nobody would care to write about it. It wasn't a national championship. I found things to be very myopic that way. No sense of the whole. It's basically a national championship or sit down. And that was a hard thing to think about because basically developing people is all things, and so that's what I always ask me, people always used to ask me, what do you do? And I said, I'm in the business of developing people.
So simple, but it's so true. It's simple, but and I don't say that from a standpoint of a negative connotation. It's just simple doesn't mean that it's easy, but it's like when it's at you look at the foundation of what a great coach or great leader does, you in essence just you kind of hit it with that, if you will. And we've kind of touched on a little bit some of the different layers that kind of go into that. Um, with it too, you've kind of touched on some of the pressures that you felt like you had as you were stepping into Duke and who you were kind of following in their steps. And when you think about navigating the pressure of expectations, whether those are external or self-imposed during your coaching career, what were the things that helped you kind of navigate those?
Well, I was pretty naive. I think that's a good thing and a bad thing. Um, I was just raring to go and so excited to be at Duke. I had been admitted to Duke as a student athlete. I had been recruited to Duke. It was a full circle moment. Um, it was tough moving my family. It was particularly tough for my daughter, her age, but my son was young enough to be totally thrilled. And we got closer to family, and there were just so many incredible things about it. Obviously, a great program, working alongside Coach K. After working alongside Coach Izzo, I'm a unique coach that way. Nobody else has done that, and it was really interesting. So there was a love and a love for Duke, and there still is a love and a love for Duke, but it was far from perfect. And because there were people that tried to intercede, you know, just basically didn't support me. There were some funny conversations going on about, oh, well, Gail didn't really leave. You know, yes, she did on her own accord. She saw a wonderful opportunity at Texas, and then it was all manipulated. So there was, there was factions and some bad actors, but overall, well, loving the student athletes was it for me. I mean, it was all about you. You can get really, when you're on that practice floor and you're with your team, you can really isolate and you can shut down noise. For a while, I didn't even know noise was there because I was naive. But then I recognized that noise was there, but still going to practice every day and going to training table, eating meals. I very much participated. I didn't delegate relationships. I delegated stuff, scheduling calls or something like that, but I never delegated relationships. And I loved all of them. And if I felt I made a mistake, meaning saying something wrong, not quite delivering something, I always apologized. I would seek the student athlete out. And actually, one of my student athletes I sought out after leaving Duke. I called her up and I said, that wasn't I don't like that. I don't like that exchange we have. So I'm apologize for every part of my responsibility there. And so because you do that, you think of your student athletes and you got a bunch that that no problem love, they're great, they're in touch. And then you've got a little bit that, maybe they had a harder time at certain instances. And that's part of it. It's a really, it's a growth experience for everyone, including the head coach.
With that, you kind of just touched on at the beginning in that point of some of the pressures, some of the storylines that get created, and again, as human beings, we're sometimes masterful storytellers that often can be embellished or can be sometimes if we don't stop to um, confront how valid they are or the evidence for them, it can put us in some tough positions, and sometimes that comes externally as well. I'm curious to hear more from you when you think about the coaching profession and your own experiences. What there's an emotional and mental toll that comes with that coaches experience. What are some of those things that go on maybe behind the scenes that people might not realize that kind of contribute to or add some of that weight that coaches have to carry?
Yeah, it depends on the job you take. When I was at the University of Maine, we blasted to the NCAA tournament, beat Stanford, 8 years, wonderful support. I never had anything but incredible support. I mean, the wind was at my back and we were doing something special. Then I was recruited to Michigan State. Okay, so then there's expectation there, more expectation. But we bombed through and in 5 years played in the national championship. So once again, once again, you just have people caring for you, but you're a little bit naive because things that can happen are contracts. For example, I've always been a person that have increased the salaries of my coaches, of the program, of my salary, of everybody across the board. Did it at the University of Maine, did it at Michigan State, did it at Duke. But the difference is, I know at Michigan State there's a contractual breakdown that forced me to go to Duke, literally. And what that was they would not pay me the highest salary in the Big Ten when nobody in the Big Ten at that time had gone to a Final Four or had recently been to a Final Four. Let me say that. And so we went and beat Tennessee, lost to Baylor, and there was a man in the league still making a substantial amount of more money. So I asked for more dollars, did not get them. And so then I asked for my buyout. I had this horrific buyout, in which I was signed on to the night after the Final Four. after I was exhausted. So the things that people don't see is the games that can be played. And so I'm like, wait a minute, I can't have a $475,000 buyout. That's just wrong. We just went to the Final Four. So the reality is there's a bureaucratic hold. There's not as, in terms of administration, there's a lot of work to do there to have the right administrators. And so right at the time I was telling them to withdraw the buyout. And it's funny, the answer was, well, Tom Izzo has a buyout. I said, well, do you want to pay me what Tom's being paid? Of course, no, of course not. And so I felt that I was really throttled at Michigan State. I was very naive, disappointed. I didn't even tell this story when it came out. I
Mm,
just said, I'm headed to Duke. Thank you very much. And then I got absolutely attacked in the media like crazy because, oh, she thinks she's this or that. When no, it was actually Michigan State that dropped the ball, would not meet me halfway. And right as I was very flustered, Duke called, like literally
mm,
that week. And so when Duke called that week, of course, Duke is wonderful. Of course, I was attracted. However, I might not have left Michigan State. If they had met my, thoughts there, and then Duke said they'd pay the buyout. So good for Duke. So there was no chance. I didn't really even have to make a decision there. And the underpinnings are really important. I realize some people might say, oh, well, of course you would leave Michigan State for Duke. Well, no, not really. The Big Ten is a pretty good place. There's a lot of money in the Big Ten. So it wasn't as easy as that. And I also had a Final Four team coming back. So I like to tell my story so people can see the hiccups that occur. And it's mostly administrative or some crazy fans that want a lot of attention in the program. And the more they expect of you, the worse it is, right? So we went to four straight Elite Eights at Duke and lost to teams like Connecticut and the Aguma case at Stanford. I mean, Brittany Griner. I mean, lost to the top teams. And that wasn't enough. So, it depends on what you're looking for, but I learned a lot about all of that. And I'm grateful for my time at Duke and also working with Coach K and watching what he did. That was really fun for me. That was a great experience. I did the same with Tom. I understood those guys. They're tough guys. They're different, but I think it's great. I thought it was great working with them.
maybe this wasn't where I was going to go, but I'm curious kind of with that, what might be one thing that you felt like you observed that you took from those guys and tried to create and implement in your own authentic way in your coaching?
It was just seeing Tom's practices and how he has a referent power with his team that's extraordinary. The sweat equity he'd give, the running around, Tom, he's always like, but he had such a great rapport and can really push the envelope with his players. So Tom maximized every bit of his players, every bit. And obviously he's still coaching. It's amazing that he is just because it's so labor intensive, obviously. Um, and so it was great. And he also helped me in recruiting, and he was super, absolutely super. We went to a Final Four the same year. They were in Kansas City, we were in Indianapolis. It was a glorious run for Michigan State, might not ever be repeated for that to occur. And then with Coach K, Mike is just really very cerebral in how he thinks about things. I always say that he benefited from having daughters. His intuition is stronger than, with all due respect, most men. He has a way of understanding how people, what they might be thinking or not thinking, and obviously very demanding. Army background. I have a Navy background. I was very into that. Not intimidated by, he could be tough. I mean, he could be tough, and I thought it was great.
Mm,
So I learned, I watched their practices. He also helped with recruiting. They're two fine men, and I'm very fortunate to have worked alongside both.
yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing that and also just being honest about some of the realities too, that some of which again I think the outside person may have some grasp of, but not nearly to the level that you describe, right? When it comes to the admin, the bureaucracy, the games within the games, the media storylines, the expectations from fans, all of that, like and when you kind of bottle some of that up along with some of the other challenges that I think you hear a lot of coaches talk about, there's certainly the sheer number of hours that go into the role. Sometimes um, the purpose that we get kind of that we drift away from at times, if you will. Like we don't lose it per se, but we just kind of drift a little off course. And sometimes you bottle all those up and it creates this sense of burnout. And I don't know what your relationship is with that word or when you think about burnout for you, what comes to mind. But I'm curious to kind of how did you learn to either recognize it or manage it in kind of your own way as a coach?
Yes, it was difficult. A part of timing helped me somewhat. I raised two children. Maddie is now 30, Jack is 25. Maddie was born in Maine. Maine was a glorious experience. I had lots of time with Maddie and with my team and mixing it all together. I feel very fortunate about that. Moving to Michigan State, Jack was born in Maine, but he never was in Maine because he was basically a Spartan, at birth. And so we had just made that switch right when he was born. Michigan State also, at that point, I had to get some help with nannies. That was a first for me because I really hadn't had that before. But we were able to keep it pretty small town. East Lansing is a wonderful place to raise children. And so I'm very grateful that that occurred. I had neighbors, family members, people all sort of recognizing Coach P as the head coach. How can we help? And there's a really sense of family. And I feel like when people say it takes a village, yeah, it takes a village, all right. And it's better if you're all Spartans or all whatever. And so, because everyone in East Lansing is a Spartan for the most part. And so that was really beneficial because at that point, then when we went to Duke, Maddie was 12. This is when you get into those ages that can be difficult. And she was not happy because she was about to be on a state championship basketball team back in East Lansing. And so I think being a parent and a coach, timing can be helpful, and you've got to think clearly about when you're going to make moves and how you're going to work on that because that's going to directly your children, if you have children, their happiness will affect everything you do if they're not happy. So I had to really work with that at Duke, and then everything kind of came along. Duke was fantastic for my son because he went to a wonderful school called Durham Academy, which is a private school, which is just so good. And Maddie had her own experience at Riverside that she created. So all in all, it worked out great. Getting back to what you said about burnout, I thought my kids stopped me from burning out because they make you stop at least for certain hours of the day and you lock into a schedule. So what I did was from the time of about 5:30 to 7:30, 8 o'clock was family time. Kids went to bed early. My kids always went to bed early. And then I get back on the phone and work again until 10:30. So your recruiting calls, everything works around it. You start at 6 a.m. You're going till 10 p.m. or 10:30. You work 7 days a week, but I was pretty good at one day, which was usually Monday, that I did not go into the office and I tried to do as little work as possible, got a massage, exercised, made sure there was a home cooked meal. So Mondays were a fabulous day in our household. They were after that though, it all shakes out.
I can empathize certainly. I have a 1.5-year-old, so I'm a little bit on the earlier side of the continuum there, but I can understand the notion of when you come home and your kids just like they are just this natural built-in um opportunity to just be present, and just leave everything else behind, or at least the best you can. It's gotten easier since having a son, so I can empathize with that. And I'm curious now, like You kind of in describing that you talked a little bit about for you how the mirror reflects back on you and your own experiences and how your kids help with that. And I'm curious if you were to reflect the mirror out now towards there's a lot of high achieving coaches out there who feel tired, who are exhausted, and maybe don't feel like they can either um, take a step back or get maybe they don't know where to go for kind of that support. And so I'm just kind of curious, like, what kind of permission would you give to those coaches out there that might be experiencing kind of some of those feelings and those thoughts and advice?
Yes, I mean, you have to be so intentional, intentional with care. Massages are a big one because you got to get stress out. I don't care if you're a guy, gal, whatever. You have to be intentional. You have to prioritize, and maybe coaches as a whole, their shutdown period, I can't remember when it is, um, but maybe having a longer one, a good clean break for maybe it already is 2 weeks. I don't know. But because of NIL and the complicated life that we live and the different teaching that is taken and the recruiting where everyone's switching teams, because of all of that, I believe yes, more should be given. It's crazy. And you see, I go back to Tony Bennett, somebody who was just a door. I mean, he retires at 55. I retired at 55. I mean, I saw NIL coming down the pike, and here it came, and the transfer portal. And unfortunately, not enough might have been done to kind of take care of the sport a little bit. I get the NIL, and that's a wonderful teaching opportunity. Okay, about money management, philanthropy, yes, market. Okay, I can see where NIL could be just a beautiful thing. I never had to deal with it directly, but that transfer portal and the athletic directors and the presidents let that go. I mean, that I do think commitment in life is important. If a coach leaves, okay, you can leave. I get that. Coach leaves, you can leave. But it's really sad that we haven't taught a whole generation that if you make a decision to go to school X and you want to transfer, I don't believe it. You should be able to transfer in conference. I think it should be out of conference. And I think I'm a believer of sit out because you can also get your master's degree. Right? The sit out year doesn't have to be an awful year. That's a developmental year. I'm not sure that's a penalty at all. But what it does do is it tells the person who sort of wants to transfer, might be avoiding some things. It tells that person maybe to think twice. And then if you do transfer, you accept what you do and you make the best of it. So I really think that we don't have to be in this world. And the presidents and NCAA and ADs always say it's the NCAA. Well, the ADs are the NCAA. I mean, that's how they're all working together. So they just gave away the store. And that's too bad. But there should be more time. Athletic directors need to be more cognizant. Athletic directors can't just be business people. And mostly what they do is fundraise, which I understand. But they have to be more in touch with what's going on with their coaches, investing in their coaches, or you're going to see a lot of turnover. And I don't think you're ever going to see a Coach K, a Roy Williams, an Izzo, Tara Vanderveer. Those days are gone.
Mm.
Yeah.
You mentioned some of those names, and I think back to I've heard you share in a previous kind of conversation some iteration of this notion of like you can win without losing yourself, and I feel like again I'm not in any of those people's shoes that you just described. However, from afar and just listening to different things, it feels like there's a sentiment underneath for all of them that they've been able to kind of embody that kind of sentiment. And so I'm curious, like for you, when you think about our identity as coaches, you can win without losing yourself. Like, what does that phrase and sentiment mean to you?
Well, I think it's really important that you can't, you can't sell your soul. You become ineffective, transparent, and like a bubble where everything just ricochets off of you. So this goes back to, again, your core beliefs. And if those are solid, if you can really engage with those and be intentional in your communication, then I think all is good, but you just can't. I mean, I, I didn't ask Tony about his announcement. Okay, I listened to it, and to me, that would be an example of someone who wasn't going to sell their soul. Okay, I believe in this. I believe in coaching and teaching and all of this, and I just feel like that is a real question many coaches have to ask, where we never had to ask that before. And coaches aren't really coaches, sometimes they're agents. And there's a conflict of interest with the agent model and a coaching model. And those of us that came up in these eras with role models and Pat Summit and people like this, there was a way things were done and there was modeling. And I even feel that the coaching is going to go downhill. And the reason why I say that is because the poor coaches are running around trying to get deals for their kids or keep their kids happy so they don't leave. So there's this incredible, like almost apologetic sort of begging thing going on. And one thing I've learned is if you can't be in a comfort zone of demanding of a player, really, getting at, I was fair, I was tough, I was demanding. But if you can't really drive somebody because you're afraid they're going to transfer, you've lost your coaching soul. And I think there's a lot of that going on. And I don't even like the basketball I see. I don't have teams that I want to watch. I don't know why everyone thinks they can just like dribble, 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 and clear out, dribble, and dribble some more and have it be interesting, you know. And I'll go back to Gino's teams. I was always watching Gino's teams, whether I was coaching against them or not. I mean, I'd watch Tara's teams. These were incredibly coached basketball teams. I don't feel that
Mm,
anymore. I think I just feel like you have it's a craft, okay? It's not something you take up as a hobby. And you can't say, well, I'm a great agent for my team, therefore. I look, sideline out of bounds plays, horrible. Baseline out of bounds plays, horrible. Time and score, horrible. Knowing how to use a press effectively, horrible. Like I just, who am I to judge? Well, I know basketball. And you know what? If you don't score on your baseline out of bounds plays or your side, I mean, I don't think people run sideline out of bounds plays.
mhm,
We had like 10, to try to execute. So I think we've gotten away from that really crafty, stuff. And I know there are a lot of great coaches out there. I mean, I'm a little tongue in cheek here, but I will say there won't be another Gino, there won't be another Tar.
mhm, mhm. With what you just described, like you kind of acknowledge like I think everybody's kind of aware of some of the changing dynamics across the landscape of the sport. And we kind of touched on some of that, but you're also acknowledging some of the dynamic changes within the game itself and how that's evolved. And like I don't think, as you mentioned, I know you said you were being maybe a little tongue in cheek, but I don't think you're able to make those observations without being not only a teacher of this game for so long and so successful, but also like a student, right? And being somebody open to learning. And I've listened to you kind of talk a little bit about your development and kind of growth as a coach a little. And I kind of want to shift gears a little into that. And I'm curious, like when you think about your development as a coach or a leader, what might have been some key, maybe inflection points for you along the way where you really started to notice that you were evolving?
Oh gosh, that's a great question and a fun one to answer. There's back in the day, Bobby Knight, even early Pat Summit, dogmatic approach was very prevalent. I mean, it was it was drive, it was not the caboose, it was being in front of the train and just pulling your teams along to try to reach maximum potential. I could name a million dogmatic coaches. Coach K was dogmatic. He could be tougher than anybody. I mean, you could read his lips when somebody was coming off the court, so that dogmatic approach is something I definitely took on, learning from the coaches I learned from, Andy Landers, Pat Summit, Sue Gunter, of course, Joe Champy, my mentor. And that really was pervasive at that time when I was at Maine, like for those 8 years. And then once I got to Michigan State, time is beginning to obviously change here. And again, I was pretty dogmatic because you had to drag a team that had no history really of winning. And so you're just, driving it and to do it in 5 years, so many people were involved in that. Talk about a confluence of talents coming together, both administratively and within the team. But that was still pretty dogmatic. I was extremely tough on that team they told me when a team tells me you want to go to the Final Four, oh, you do? Okay, well then this is what we're going to do to get there. So there was a lot of cultural shifts at Maine and Michigan State. Now Duke had culture and winning culture. And so that process is where I really started to take a move all the way through my time there into sort of a transformational coach, dogmatic to transformational more. The women had experience. They had experience in winning. They learning how to ask them what they thought. Initially, when I came in, you're kind of new. You got to kind of lay the law down. So that's a tough time. But then beyond that, I would say more transformational. Um, for example, I never mentioned my therapist to anyone in Maine or Michigan State. So that just transforming, understanding what I could learn. And Jasmine Thomas, one of my players, um, that was remarkable. She was a wonderful person that helped in that transition. And then Chelsea Gray. I mean, if Chelsea Gray had had 4 years, we might have gone to the Final Four. She got injured. It was terrible. But Chelsea Gray taught me a lot, as we had her as a coach on the bench when she was injured. And so those are two people I really can think about, that made a difference. Haley Gurecki, who broke all sorts of records at Duke. Trisha Liston, all sorts of records. Um, Crystal Thomas. There were players that were eager to listen and also were forgiving, right? If you push too far, then they come back at you or vice versa. Like, that were open to two-way communication. So I think now we're in this transformational type of coaching. They call it a player's coach. I don't know. I, okay. But I think I think you transform into a better being. And I know I did. Even leaving Duke, my team had throttled to the top of the ACC, and then we had COVID. And so I felt very good about my last year in particular, at Duke. And we were picked to do all sorts of things, but we didn't get that chance. And I felt really good about that exit. Again,
Mhm.
transformational, off you go. You've got more on your contract, but it's time to go. It's COVID, new coach can come in. It's the thing to do. So you're transformational even heading out the door. Not too many people leave a contract on the table.
It's true. I mean, there's no question about it. And I think again, just you mentioned earlier, we talked a little bit earlier about like not losing kind of yourself in the process, if you will, and just how important that was. And I'm kind of curious, and this can pertain to at any of those stops along the way, but sticking kind of with this theme of growth and development, what might have been some habits or routines or just different mechanisms that you put in place to make sure that you were continuing to grow as a leader yourself, kind of during those successes on the court.
I think obviously reading is critical. I've read a lot of books and going to practices, Coach Izzo, Coach K, watching what they do, particularly since I knew them, watching their games and seeing what I could learn from. Obviously, other women, I look at Tara Vanderveer and what she taught me when I went to USA basketball. That was a new arena for me, and she was a gold medal, Olympic coach at the time. And so you really have to seek out mentors. It's something I talk about all the time. Mentorship matters, and you do not have to know a person for them to be a mentor. All you have to do is step forward and say, I need you to help me. With Tara at USA Basketball, we were, both coaches, me at Michigan State and her at Stanford. But I made a point to chase her down and at some point didn't agree with her. And she was like, okay, let's review this. Um, and so it was a great exchange. I'm really grateful for that exchange I had in that 2-year stint. And we won 2 gold medals, great kids, and I had mentorship. And I think that when I worked for Joe Champy at Auburn, I also had mentorship. He taught me how to do things. He put me on the spot, made me uncomfortable. That's a thing today that I think is a little tough. Nobody wants to be uncomfortable. Conflict is necessary. And when you're trying to keep someone at your school to not transfer, well, then where's the what is anyone uncomfortable or do we just think everything is rosy? And so I think that's a critical point. But the mentorship piece is everything. And I sought out people, ask questions, listen to my coaches, uh, and also hired older than me. Like when Coach Brown, when Al was on the staff with me, I loved having somebody older. Like, why not? I was this age. Why not get somebody older who has a little bit more wisdom, might be able to say things differently. So that was also a piece that was important to me that I was able to accomplish for a lot of my career.
You described the word kind of mentorship and a theme that I've had similar conversations with other guests on this season is this notion of like who coaches you. And you can replace the word coaches with mentors if you want, but and sometimes that's formally, sometimes that's informally, and sometimes it's through inspiration that you kind of in essence touched on. And so I love that example of just kind of being willing to learn and grow from so many different sources. And again, that can be formal or informal. I'm curious for you. This is a little bit of a side, but I'm curious. You talked about a lot of basketball influences and mentors in basketball, and I'm curious if at any point in your career when it came to helping you as a leader and building your culture and so on, what maybe inspiration you drew from other arenas along the way to kind of help influence that.
Oh, sure. Well, I don't talk about a lot. I'm pretty personal, but my faith, in the morning, I was the best coach I've ever been at the end of my Duke tenure, let's say the last 4 years. And that's because I began to do devotionals in the morning and get up early, 5:30, and really try to connect myself to the way I would be thinking for that day. I did not have that my entire career. I was a late person to faith. I didn't have any faith in my family. I had no mentorship there. And it was one of the ways that Kyra Lambert, another fabulous point guard at Duke, she and I began to connect um, on a faith-based way. And so I actually got baptized very late, 50, 52, whatever it was. I can't remember. And so I really enjoyed the quiet time. And it's too bad because I did feel upon exiting, I was like, geez, you're kind of in your groove here. You kind of have gone from a dogmatic coach, to as a transformational, and then you've added faith, and so many of my players had faith and would talk about it or not, depending upon if they wanted to. So I think that I've really grown as a person, and I'm now meant to do other things, which that's clear. But but I just think that became part of me. And I'm really fortunate for that. I'm grateful for that.
Mm. It's wonderful to hear kind of that evolution that you just walked us through. And I think that's so powerful in so many ways. From a personal standpoint, one thing I really believe in is just kind of this connection between mind, body, and spirit, and kind of filling all of those things in our life. And you, in different ways, touched on in this conversation what that looked like for you, and how some of it took some time to get to a point where you learn the importance of nourishing kind of all of those different pieces of who you were, to kind of, and I think that's such a I'm glad earlier you mentioned the Tony Bennett press conference. I saw there was, I watched the whole thing, but I watched one particular segment where he talked about not losing, didn't use these words, but what you mentioned of like not losing yourself or selling his soul to the current landscape in coaching. And one of the things that it he kind of raised for me, at least in my own reaction, was just the reminder like we're all kind of renting our roles, if you will, like our titles and the roles that we're in, but our value as human beings, like that is a constant. And in order to, I think, share that value with others, we need to kind of fill and nourish all those different pieces of who we are. So it's wonderful to kind of hear how that evolution looked for you. And I think that kind of creates a good segue here to the last couple of questions from me, and I want to be respectful of your time. But you mentioned some of these other things now that you've stepped into, these other spaces like speaking and writing and advocacy and so much mentorship. What's kind of fueling all of that work for you today?
Well, yeah, for about 4 years, I was speaking about Secret Warrior, a book that came out, told a story, my story as a coach, a wife, a mother, all of that, brain health challenges, etc. So I really enjoyed, Robin Roberts had me in GMA, which was so kind. I was able to get the word out, get out there and speak. And then I did that for a while, but I also found myself getting pretty exhausted, being back in hotels for just one night or two nights. I don't think I'm like cut out for that anymore. I've just done it too much. And so I kind of rebooted myself and wondered what was next. And right about that time, Texas called to be in a Tower Fellow program where we are back in school. And at the same time, we have all these events and things we do because we're all like 55 and older, up to 75, I think. And so I'm a huge Hook'em right now, huge fan. They've treated me so well in Texas and Austin. And so I did 6 months there already, and I'm going 6 months again to finish the program. And then I'm going to wait and see what really happens. I would like to get back into work. I don't know what that means. I feel like I'm a little wasted given my experience level. Like I need to find a place, but I also can't move around. So the speaking circuit, which I actually thought would be my thing, didn't feel like my thing. I felt that was a little bit dog and pony. I just felt like I was flash in the pan, and I don't know. It wasn't my thing. So now I'm looking more for a place I can be.
Mm.
Maybe 6 months in Austin, maybe 6 months in Durham. I'm trying to cultivate my life. Maybe other places, I don't know. But that's kind of my direction. I've got a foundation. It's a Coach B for Life, for Foundation for Brain Health, but still got it all set up, but still working on the monies going in and looking for that billionaire. I'm
Who's
sorry, but
hopefully listening.
they're out there, billionaires who just want to help with brain health, but don't want to get directly involved. But they can see what I do with the foundation and how a coach is involved. So eventually I'm going to find that person and partner with, and then I would probably be knee deep in the foundation. So it's all a process, and I kind of pray for my direction. I'm like, well, where am I to go to do the best work, to be helpful? Will I ever earn another paycheck? I don't know. but I am 60. So I don't know. So it's a lot, there's lots of questions you end up asking yourself.
And sometimes with the questions we ask ourselves and listening how do you kind of describe it, you also keep yourself open to possibilities and opportunities, which is what I really kind of hear. And it's already kind of cool to see, even just what you're doing now at Texas, how that plays into it, but then also just being open, like, hey, I don't know exactly what the path is next for me, if you will, but I'm just going to continue to show up. I'm going to continue to be and allow things to be created along the way, which I think is a really nice freeing space to live from. And I think that kind of maybe my last question here, that this is a little bit of a different question because I do ask it to every guest, and I've noticed that sometimes this is kind of a challenging question for coaches because it's phrased in a way that they're generally not coaches are not one to boast. We're big into giving constantly, but my question to wrap us is, what's something that you're proud of that maybe you don't always get an excuse to talk about or to share?
Within my coaching career or in my life?
That could be either direction, big or small. You can,
Okay,
yeah.
gotcha. Well, I'm always proud of our teams and the championships we won and all that. Okay, that's a given. One thing I am very proud about, which is a funny thing, because I can't find an agent. I wrote my first fiction novel. It's called Stella Rising. So I wrote Choice Not Chance. I wrote Secret Warrior. Those are nonfiction. So I took fiction classes and I went outside the box and I wrote this book, which is completely done. And now I'm in this war with agents who say, oh, well, it should be YA, young adult. I'm like, no, it's a book club type of thing. And so, no, I'm not sure it can be adult. Maybe you should rewrite it for YA. And so I'm in this hilarious spot of this book is completely done. It's a story of a tennis player and her name is Stella. And she rises, and then all sorts of things sort of come about. And I love this book. And I never get to talk about it because nobody cares about it. And it's not published. But I think it's an example to everyone out there that labor of love is important,
Mm,
even if it's not monetized. And no author except Stephen King makes all the money or whoever else, but it's not monetized. I took the classes. I did the work. I think it's very good. I think it's very good. Other people have told me it's very good, but it still is, well, not published.
mm. And then we add an important word yet at the end there maybe. And obviously again, you being open to possibilities and opportunities, I think, wherever that goes, it's gonna go and it's gonna be great. And I appreciate you sharing that example. I love the labor of love sentiment with it. And just as a whole, Joanne, I just want to thank you again for taking some time. I know you have a lot of different things on your plate. And so I'm super appreciative of you just kind of peeling back the curtain a little bit more on some of the things that you've already been really outspoken with, but also things that you're truly passionate about. I think we can kind of feel that or hear that in how you talk about it. So I just want to thank you again for your time.
Well, thank you. And keep doing your good work. People need to hear stories and there's just so many things we can extrapolate and get to collaboration. And I just think it's the work you do is fabulous. So keep on doing, and it's a pleasure. And maybe I'll see you again.